Dear Hilkka, dear friends, dear participants, I'm so happy to see so many of you here today. In my own presentation, I will look at Professor Pollitt's, Christopher's, legacy to Finnish public management reforms through 4 case studies during the period of 1996 to 2030. These 4 are the so-called Finra Project, the 4th Quality Conference that Professor Buchert already mentioned, the IIES conference in 2009, and our Governments for the Future project. These are, of course, only glances, so it's not a comprehensive picture of the continuing influence he had to our public governance thinking for over 2 decades. Also, it's good to know that my presentation's perspective is that of a practitioner who has worked in these projects and with the Finnish public governance policy during that time. Of course, Christopher's influence started way before 1996, as we had read his work, and he was already quite famous in Finland. And I remember very vividly that I genuinely could not believe that we could have such good luck that he would actually be working with us. But what have we then learned from his wise words and work, and how have they influenced our own work? The Finra Project, here is the picture of the final report of that book, which was also the title of our today's seminar. But it was actually part of a wider evaluation program of over 10 different evaluation projects from different angles and of different reform areas. I have to say here it was such good times that we could afford such a large project. But the Finra Project was the international comparison of this program. It was a comparison between Denmark, Finland, United Kingdom, New Zealand and Netherlands, and it was done by a team led by Christopher. The first message of the final report was actually on the very first page, where Christopher quoted Paavo Haavikko. "Every house has many builders and is never finished." It was an important message that we keep repeating today. Public governance reforms are not a tick-the-box exercise. I think that this lesson we have taken to our hearts, and we try to emphasize this in many of our reform areas, like, for instance, open governance and ethics, that developing is a continuous exercise. The Finra took also up the problem that is distinct for Finland, that in public management reforms, the language plays a role, and it is not particularly easy, as many of the key terms of public governance are challenging in Finnish. The term public governance itself translates not well into Finnish. Management can be translated in many ways. Trust and confidence both are luottamus in Finnish. There are many examples. And during the years, we have gone in circles on which terms to use and where. And well, there is still some clarifications to be done. This is one of the many areas where our homework is not done yet. One of the issues taken up in the Finra study was also that the development paths starting from 1980, which was the starting year of the comparison, of the 5 countries' studies were different, and they had stayed different. Not so that some were more advanced than others. The countries did not have the same starting points, and they were not even competing on the same track. More like crossing their own area with their own vehicle, maybe with some common parts in those vehicles. This was a message from the Finra. And this is a lesson that we have partly learned, I think. But always there are pressures arising to do copy-pasting from other countries and not seeing the value of our own path or remembering our own history, like Gerd said. Context matters, but does not mean that we could not learn from others, just not so straightforwardly. The Finra comparison showed that Denmark and Finland were different from each other, but even stronger difference existed between them and the other 3 countries, out of which Netherlands was one of its kind. New Zealand and UK had put a lot of weight on privatization, Nordic countries more in forming agencies into state-owned enterprises. There were what so-called traditional structural reforms everywhere, but maybe more in Finland than elsewhere, stated the report. This finding was one of the triggers for the discussion that is still going on in Finland about whether the emphasis still is too much on structural reforms. For a long time already, we have talked about the balance between structural, steering, and working methods-based reforms. Especially since the central government reform that started about 5 years after the Finref, we have paid special attention to include all three aspects in our major reforms and in our thinking. Still, if you allow me to oversimplify, I would say that there are 4 categories of people in the Finnish public administration, or at least in the developers in the Finnish public administration. The first group is the structural reformers, the second one is the steering systems reformers, and the third is those who believe in only working methods reforms, and the fourth is the all of the above group, and luckily I personally think the fourth group today is the mainstream. Another difference between the countries studied in the Finref was implementation. It had been intensive and even harsh in United Kingdom and New Zealand, and much milder in Finland and Denmark, was the analysis from Christopher and his team. This was a Finnish strength. No strikes, no people in the streets, implementation moderately but effectively and with strong support from training. To a great extent, we have tried to keep up this good work in ensuring that different stakeholders can be part of the projects in an early enough stage to ensure smoother implementation. I hope that I'm right in saying that this is part of the DNA of the Finnish way of working. Lately, our challenge in this has been the quick phase of reform with short deadlines, where new projects roll on so that the implementation of previous ones are not yet even ongoing. Some of the major reform projects of past years would perhaps also have profited from longer perspectives, less strict deadlines as an option to what has happened, that reforms have to start from the beginning when they fail very near the finishing line, although they never finish, but still of the finishing path, because the preparatory work has been too short and narrow. The Finref also took up the role of the center of government ministries. Not much thought about this had been done at that point in Finland. In some ministries, there had been even growth from tasks switched from agencies to ministries. There was not so much systematic action at that point on thinking about the role. This became part of the central government reform in the beginning of 2000, and gradually ministries have changed, and to the agencies belonging operational tasks have diminished. There was also a comparison that Christopher and the team made about the Ministry of Finance and the UK Treasury. The results then showing that our Ministry of Finance had remained unchanged and more similar, so unchanged from 1980 to 1996. I leave to you as listeners to judge what is the situation today. At least there have been a lot of structural changes in our ministry every other year, actually. Gerd already mentioned the 4th Quality Conference for Public Administrations in Europe. The core of the conference were the almost 80 best practice cases from all EU member states, and this was during our previous presidency in 2006. Thinking how to improve further the quality conferences, and especially, of course, the quality of their content and use of results, we decided to ask Professors Pollitt and Puckert and Elke Löffler from Governance International to be the scientific rapporteurs of the 4th Quality Conference. Again, we got even much more than we had hoped for, and we knew to expect a lot, so we were really truly astonished how much and how important information we could get through the scientific rapporteurs. We got the whole analysis of all these best practice cases, but we also got the co-creation cycle model. Quoting the rapporteurs themselves, and quote, "The fourth Quality Conference in Tampere has had a lot to live up to. The previous conferences in Lisbon, Copenhagen, and Rotterdam had shown that governments of almost every European country were concerned to improve the quality of their public sector," end of quote. The first quality conferences had been called Sharing Best Practices. The second was called Innovation, Change and Partnership. Third, Making Opportunities Work. Thus, it made sense to us to build the fourth around the theme of making quality sustainable. In analyzing the best practices of the fourth Quality Conference, a question rose to the rapporteurs: are these only initiatives, or do they actually bring lasting change? And what they stated was that it is clear that long-term quality strategies cannot just consist of a series of short-term initiatives. Indeed, there are indications that an overdose of initiatives can result in reform fatigue or loss of political interest, said the rapporteurs. Many of the Finnish listeners here know that experiments are very pop and up-to-date in today's Finland, and I'm all in favor of the experiments. But it is good to be aware more maybe in Finland than we're doing today, that there is a chance, like with the best practices, that they end up as fragmented initiatives, resulting in initiative fatigue and too little contribution to further development. Thus, it is good to remember the wider cultural change that is visible in the co-cycle, an involvement of stakeholders in general and citizens in particular at each and every stage. None of the big challenges that we faced in 2006 and that we face now, like climate change, aging society, migration, can be solved by governments acting alone. Cooperative solutions are required, not only in the form of cooperation between governments, but also through cooperation between governments, civil society associations, and other stakeholders such as the media and businesses. I think this is a very important message from the work of the rapporteurs. Ensuring better outcomes is always the crucial and challenging thing in development work, and outcomes in particular are by definition co-produced. Security, anti-corruption, trust, or a good environment all require the active collaboration by citizens and customers. Thus, these all require co-production, co-design, co-decision, co-evaluation. We have tried to advance this important message from Christopher, Gert, and Elke in Finland stubbornly, I hope. But it is a cultural change and it takes time. Even though internationally looking, we feel we are quite strong in this, but there is still a lot to do. Compared to 2006, the world has changed, and there is one more area of tasks we have when it comes to engaging stakeholders and citizens. Previously, we needed to develop further our good practices. First task. The other task was to find what needs to be done because of the new challenges brought about through digitalization and growing demands from citizens. Now, unfortunately, there are also threats coming from outside our borders trying to build distrust. So there is work, and that is why when looking now again at this publication, this Making Good Quality Sustainable, the co-creation model, I hope, can see that it would actually be an excellent handbook or background material for our work today without any need of update. It is right there for us. So I would say, like Gert, go and find it on the internet. I don't think you can buy it in the shops, or ask me, I'll send it to you by email or give you a link to it, because it's really something we need today. The report of the rapporteurs outlined this co-model for a cooperative approach as a key to long-term sustained improvement of public service quality. Like the rapporteurs themselves stated, it is in some respects an ambitious model, and many of the initiatives that they looked in 2006 fell short of what was suggested, but not all. Some of the best practice cases even had all these features in them. The rapporteurs themselves saw that this was a strong indication that the cooperative model is not just an academic abstraction, but rather something which can be achieved by public servants, politicians, citizens, and other stakeholders when they work together cooperatively. Actually, the co-quality cycle was also the content of our OECD 2015 ministerial meeting in Helsinki, the ministerial meeting of Ministers for Public Governance, which was titled Public Governance for Inclusive Growth. The parts of the cycle that were the key content of the meeting had slightly different names. They were called voice, design, delivery, and accountability. But the thinking was exactly the same cooperative way in each stage. So it was already good to see that this work of Christopher's, Gert, and Elke's was alive and kicking in this ministerial meeting. I was also happy when going through the report now that I found that there it is, the familiar sentence that we have been repeating since, almost as a mantra for the years. This, to us, very important sentence or message is as follows, quote, "Citizens should not just trust their public institutions, but these public institutions should also trust their citizens and customers in a sufficient and functional way to realize a particular level of outcomes." Now it's just up to us to see that this truly is and becomes more the reality everywhere in our public institutions. The Tampere conference had two questions that we had actually put in the program for the participants or the participating organizations. They were asked, what are your organization's development goals and what are your personal development goals? These are questions we often ask. Here again, the rapporteur showed us what is the much more important question, obvious to them, but maybe not to us always. The necessary third question is, what are your citizens' development goals? The third glance that I have chosen is the IIS 2009 conference in Helsinki. It was actually a conference for us where we celebrated the Finnish administration 200 years, and we of course wanted to choose the best person as the key rapporteur. We of course chose Christopher. We rushed and so eagerly to get him as the key rapporteur that we went straight away and asked him, and actually only later got to know that it was not our role at all to ask or choose the key rapporteur. But luckily, because we had made such a brilliant choice, the IIS was happy to overlook our mistake, and Christopher was the key rapporteur of the Future of Nation Building Conference, where actually Turo Virtanen was one of the co-rapporteurs in the team, in the conference. So Christopher challenged us right away and challenged our theme of Future of Nation Building by saying the future is a place where the questions always outnumber the answers. Are we building nations or are we building institutions? And if we are building institutions, don't they need to reflect the 21st century citizenship? He asked us in his final word, or in his report, in his speech at the conference. He reminded us also of the global perspective. Nation states are becoming one actor among others. There's EU, there's the global perspective. We don't always remember that. This is certainly the case with us in Finland often. We do our reforms actually from a very national perspective. But public policy results are not just national. Again, I quote Christopher. It is, and the quote goes, quote, "It is utterly pointless for one country to hit all its targets if its neighbors are missing all of theirs." End of quote. With civic results, it goes even deeper, and there the trust relationship is vital. But the trust relationship that we so much talked about here in today's Finnish public management and administration is not just to municipality or national government and the two-way street between citizens and our national government, but it's actually, like was stated by Christopher, to the United Nations, to the European Parliament, to the Interpol, to the Google. And my own feeling is that here we would need to be much more vocal nationally to have, we concentrate to such a large extent on our domestic governance and lack a proper connection between good governance and international institutions as part of our foreign policy and of our public governance policy. We need to kind of have a more dialogue and a wider view. This is for us. This is not critique towards our foreign policy, it's critique to us public governance reformers. And the last glance that I have is the Governments for the Future project. In 2013, we created a joint project with 5 public administrations: Finland, Austria, Sweden, United Kingdom and Scotland, organized together with the Sirpa Prime Minister's Office and Ministry of Finance. We had an idea that a small group in-depth discussions about the most challenging public governance questions of the center of government, with topics defined by the group itself. Luckily, already before we started the actual project, we understood that we needed a critical friend in this work, and we needed academic thinking, academic questioning and support. And we asked Christopher to join, and we were so happy to get him in this project. One very kind of, not pragmatic, but one very kind of crucial state was also that he suggested to us to do a literature review for this project. Literature reviews, besides being a hard word to pronounce, are not that much used in Finnish reform work. And this was extremely valuable for us. The review made for this project, but also the realization that there is a tool we could use much more. But of course, Christopher's role was also crucial to the success of the format of the project. The project was very important in content-wise, but also, I think, because we were very worried with Sirpa, how would this project work if we just discuss, and maybe people are not happy if the discussions don't lead into anything. But we got the structure through Christopher's facilitator work, and then in the end also because he wrote the actual report of the final report from this work. So it was, in the end, this format of small number of countries in a kind of a very trustful atmosphere discussing very challenging issues became a very big success, and that was very much due to Christopher's facilitating of the work. The Governments for the Future had 3 themes and also some cross-cutting issues. And the method of working in this project was, like I said, workshop backed with analyses. And in the final report that Christopher wrote, he said this is not, it's a map of issues that requires attention. So we did not end up with any kind of a 6-step program for each country, but map of issues for all the countries involved. One of the overarching issues in this work was horizontal policymaking, and the theme of cooperation came strongly up again. And quoting again, the center of government can achieve most things only in careful thought through cooperation with others, more often as a facilitator. With the parliamentary election soon at hand in Finland, this question of center of government and cooperation is topical again. And it is perhaps good to pay even more attention to the cooperation and facilitator role of the center of government than to the structural reforms of center of government that have been recently proposed by a think tank. Another also very topical issue in front of the election is the question of prioritization. The Governments for the Future conclusions in Christopher's report was that the key policy priorities often are more realistic than attempting to be comprehensive. The current Finnish government program is strategic and it's prioritized, but it has been discussed by different actors in the process and stakeholders that even perhaps further clarification and prioritization might be needed. Here there are close links with implementation. They are vital and always important also to be kept in mind already in the first phases. The report says also that predominantly technocratic approaches to strategy making are unlikely to be successful as strategies require political backing. The process of forming them will ideally help foster trust between leading politicians and civil servants. This is very important also for the coming times in the Finnish public administration and politics. Think tanks cannot develop strategies all by themselves, and an observation from Finland, personal observation, that there are think tanks that are selling, or you could call it even lobbying their strategies to be bought for the next government, especially at this hour before elections. And that leaves the process of doing the strategy almost completely out of the picture, and it leaves out of the picture the building of the trust between the different stakeholders and between the politicians. The budget process is not an ideal place for strategy, but the conclusion in the Governments for the Future report was that there has to be a link, and building such a link takes years. It is by no means an overnight job. And that is something that we are very much also trying, and we just met before this meeting, and if Sirpa allows me to quote her, we have been advancing in this. I think this is a thing that we have been able to build, and I think it's also because we have used this Government for the Future work very much as a basis for now already 5 years for the basis of our public governance work. In this context, there's also, of course, a link to the performance management, which can never be an automated exercise. The data got in the process always needs interpretation. Thus, the report emphasizes also stakeholder cooperation and trust. Linked to that, the more systematic use of evidence was one of the areas of the Governments for the Future. And it is very relieving to us that Christopher states in the report that this is no easy task. My Ministry of Finance colleagues who are here and who are working truly hard on this subject may find this especially soothing. As may be the finding that internal and external actors can be of help in this if there is time to build trust and trustfulness. It was also noted that the demand may be a bigger problem than supply. There is supply, but is there enough demand? This is why we are trying to build this demand by developing our leadership and management culture from this angle. Role of the parliamentarians is also maybe slightly forgotten in the Finnish case, and their interest in good knowledge base and evidence. This was also an important message from the Governments for the Future report. And this is an important message still, even though there has been some developments in this area during the last year. In addition, innovations need a strong link to an evidence base. Why are they needed? What is it in the current status that calls for innovation? Successful innovations, it was noted in the Governments for the Future report, are such that they have clear, understandable goals and logic, even though the actions that follow might be complex ones. Like I said in the beginning, all these 4 glances, all these points about how we have tried to take forward these suggestions and make true to Christopher's legacy in these points is completely a personal interpretation. But I took some of the things that I found that were kind of visible in these 4 glances. One was the continuous systematic development, the issue of never finished. It's not a tick-the-box exercise. This is lesson that I hope we have learned, but where there is a lot of homework for us still to do. The outward-looking, the co-creation, the co-cycle, the citizens, but also the more wider international perspective, global and citizens. The importance of implementation, performance, results, also the value of evaluation. The different roles of different actors, the trust between the actors, how to build those possibilities for building trust, and the importance of cooperation. These are some of the issues that we have taken to our hearts and are close to ours. And I may have been self-critical towards our own work and towards how well we have been able to observe these findings and analyses, for example, from these 4 projects mentioned today. There we take comfort in the quote that I first showed you, every house has many builders and is never finished. But I also have to remind you, like I always want to do in the end when I've been self-critical, so this is also reminding myself, that we in Finland are internationally compared actually good in public governance. And Christopher certainly played an important role in getting us there. Christopher's legacy goes on. Just this spring, we based our Future of Performance Management workshop very much on his article on 40 years of performance management. And also, as a personal note in the end, this is the tough part. I wanted to say, I was always so proud to have known him and worked with him and had utmost respect for his work and knowledge. But even more, I admired his 2 qualities. He was always so humane, and he was always kind and understanding. I hope this is also a legacy we will be able to carry forward in ourselves and in our joint work. Thank you.